Okay, let's dive into this. It is literally the ultimate financial dream, right? Just imagine it. Waking up, rolling over to check your brokerage account, and seeing that you've generated $50,000 a year purely in passive income without lifting a single finger. I mean, it sounds absolutely incredible. And honestly, it's exactly why dividend investing has spread like wildfire on the internet. But, it brings us to a really central question we have to ask ourselves. Can you actually live off dividends? We see this passive income dream totally romanticized online, basically painted as this quick, easy path to financial freedom. But in this explainer, we're going to strip away all that hype. We need to break down the hard, unyielding mathematical realities of what it actually takes to pull this off in 2026. And spoiler alert, we'll see why chasing the wrong strategy could actually end up making you poor. Let's start with Section 1, the math of passive income. Before we even think about strategy, we absolutely have to look at the mechanics. Because it all boils down to this one simple, totally non-negotiable formula. You take your desired passive income, you divide it by your dividend yield percentage, and boom, that equals the total amount of capital you need. If your goal is $50,000 a year, well, you simply cannot escape this math. And this brilliantly illustrates just how dramatic the results of that formula can be. Think about it. If you went all in on Apple stock, which has a tiny 0.39% yield, you would need a staggering $12.5 million invested just to hit that $50K a year mark. But compare that to a dividend stalwart like Pepsi, which yields somewhere around 3.8%. Suddenly, your capital requirement drops to $1.3 million. Huge difference, right? Now, obviously, putting 100% of your money into just one stock isn't a realistic plan. When we look at well-rounded, sensible dividend portfolios, the data shows they typically hover somewhere between a 2.5% and 3.5% average yield. So walking through these numbers, that means to hit your 50 grand goal, the average person actually needs between $1.4 and $2 million invested. To generate real, livable income, you need two things: a decent yield and, well, a massive pile of capital. Which brings us to Section 2, the high yield trap. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, why not just buy the absolute highest yielding stocks out there so I can hit that target way faster? Well, take a look at this number, 66 years. That is exactly how long the legacy giant 3M successfully raised its dividend year after year after year. They were a bedrock stock, a famed dividend aristocrat, paying out a yield over 4%. People felt entirely safe banking their retirements on them. But then, in 2024, they shocked everyone. They just completely cut their dividend, and 66 years of reliable increases were wiped out in an instant.
And listen, 3M wasn't just some isolated incident. AT&T, another really famous high-yield darling, slashed their dividend by a massive 46% back in 2022. Walgreens cut theirs after over 40 years of reliable increases. So the warning here is crystal clear. A really high yield is often a massive red flag. It usually signals a company that's struggling to find a better use for its own cash. Instead of reinvesting in their own growth, they're just paying it out. And when a business stops growing, well, that high yield you were relying on can suddenly vanish into thin air.
Let's move to Section 3, dividends versus total return. If chasing massive yields is a trap, we obviously need a data-backed alternative. Let's look at the financial reality for most folks right now. If we adjust recent Federal Reserve data for inflation, the median net worth in America is conservatively around $217,000. Now, if you took that entire net worth and put it into a really generous 5% yielding portfolio, you're only generating about $10,850 a year. Because building a $2 million portfolio is just incredibly difficult for the average person, focusing solely on squeezing out dividends right from day one might actually make growing your wealth a whole lot harder. And Vanguard's research totally backs this up. As Vanguard's Colleen Giaconetti points out, when you optimize your portfolio solely for dividends, you actually accidentally overallocate to value and defensive sectors. We're talking things like utilities, consumer staples, and healthcare. And at the exact same time, you end up severely underweighting the massive growth engines of the market, like consumer discretionary and technology. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visualizes that exact opportunity cost. It's a stark contrast. In a backtest running from 2016 to 2025, a Vanguard dividend portfolio generated an annual growth rate of 9.43%. And yes, to be clear, that number does include the dividends being paid out, but a total market blend generated 10.49%. So by ignoring the broader market just to get those dividends, you are actively sacrificing your growth. Over a couple of decades, that seemingly small 1% difference, it compounds into a massive amount of missing wealth. All right, section 4, the age-based strategy. So how do we actually balance this need for growth with the desire for passive income down the line? It really requires a practical life cycle approach based on exactly where you are right now. If you're under 35, the strategy is pretty straightforward. Prioritize growth and compound interest. Look, a $10,000 portfolio yielding 4% only gives you $400 a year. That literally does not move the needle. You need to take calculated risks to build your base of capital while you still have decades to recover from any market dips. But if you're over 35, you can start making a shift. In your late 30s, maybe you allocate 5 to 10% into income-generating ETFs. Then, as you hit your 40s and 50s and start approaching retirement, that can scale up to 40 or even 50% for added stability.
And we definitely have to acknowledge the current financial landscape we're in. In our 2026 reality check, we're sitting in an interest rate environment where a 3% stock dividend yield is highly comparable to simply putting your money into a high-yield savings account or just buying a treasury bond. The stock market is not the only game in town for yield right now, and those alternative options, they come with virtually zero risk compared to gambling on individual stocks. Moving on to Section 5, taxes and your dividends.
Because, let's face it, no matter what your strategy is, Uncle Sam never, ever misses a payout. Let's walk through how this actually works. Imagine you're 65, you hit your $1 million goal at a 5% yield, so you're making $50,000 a year in dividends. If you earn under $49,450 as a single filer, you're actually looking at a 0% capital gains tax. Zero. From there, up to over $500,000, it jumps to 15%. The massive advantage here comes from what we call qualified dividends, which you get simply by holding your shares for longer than 60 days. That qualifies you for these favorable capital gains rates instead of your normal, higher, ordinary income tax. Honestly, if you pair this with the standard deduction, you could potentially pay zero federal taxes on that income.
But here's a serious pro tip for you. If you want to bypass that whole headache and avoid those taxes altogether, invest in your dividend companies through a Roth IRA. Inside a Roth, your earnings and profits grow entirely tax-free. Any dividends you receive inside that account stay completely yours. You just have to remember, if you hold dividend stocks in a regular, normal brokerage account, even if you set those dividends to automatically reinvest and you never touch the cash, they are still going to be taxed every single year.
So the crucial point is, it really all comes back to your magic number. You've got to take your desired passive income, divide it by a realistic yield, and look at the actual capital required. Build aggressively while you're young, slowly shift to safety as you age, and whatever you do, avoid that high-yield trap. After breaking down all this math, it leaves us with one really crucial question. Are you willing to sacrifice a massive amount of your total wealth tomorrow just to feel the temporary comfort of a dividend check today?